Hey Geography peeps, welcome back. And get your Geography Now merch like this Geography Now mug or this random Hannah shirt at geographynow.com. Not selling out if it's your brand. This time I have one of those vitamin liquid things in my drink. It's hard to explain. It's those things that bubble up. Whatever, that's not geography. So as you guys know, I'm working on the next country episode, which means, I gotta give you guys some content because it's a YouTube channel. I gotta put videos on it. So I asked you guys on social medias, if I were to do a filler video while I'm working on the main country episode, what topic would you like me to cover? I took some ideas and I figured this might be a cool one. The weirdest countries that existed that you've never heard of. So I looked into my research archives and I came up with a list of some really cool ones that I think you might appreciate learning about if you're a person that likes to learn things. If you're not, then I don't know why you're here. But anyway, the first one, the Free State of Bottleneck. Yeah, Bottleneck. It existed for about 4 years between 1919 to 1923. So let's just kind of set the tone, okay? World War I, after it's over, the Rhine Valley on what is now Germany was basically split up between areas controlled by France, the US, and Britain. And their strategy to do it was to draw circular radiuses 19 miles long, each centered on a nearby town. They took the towns of Mainz and Koblenz, which distance-wise are 40 miles apart. But here's the thing, if you have a 19-mile radius, those two radii are not gonna touch at some point. So it essentially left an undeclared zone that looked like a bottleneck. So what happened was there was a super narrow 2.5 kilometer corridor that went all the way to the river and nobody declared it. This meant that all the stuff in between that skinny narrow area, shaped like a bottleneck, was left undeclared, including the largest town, Lorch, which became the capital. Now here's the thing, Lorch and all the small towns in that skinny narrow corridor area, they technically were connected to the rest of Germany through that corridor, but the problem was there were no roads or railroads that went through the corridor. It's just a bunch of empty forests and fields. And the Weimar Republic of Germany was like, we are not even gonna try to attempt to connect to the rest of the undeclared zone, because it was like right next to the radiuses of France and the USA. So they didn't even bother to try to connect with Lorch or the rest of the people, so that just kind of left them in an undeclared zone. For the first year or two, the people were like, okay, I guess we're kind of like our own thing. But the problem was they kind of struggled to do trade or legitimate business because they weren't considered anything, and the US and France were like, well, we can't really quite cooperate because if we do, then that means we recognize them, so we're just gonna leave them alone, which meant that their entire economy for like 4 years was based off of like smuggling and black market deals. In the end, it fell apart, and then it just kind of got fused back into Germany after the US and France left. So kind of declared independence because nobody wanted them, but then they realized they couldn't move forward, became Germany. Done. The next one, the Tangier International Zone. This was an interesting one. It lasted from 1924 to 1956. It was kind of like the North African Great Gatsby. So basically, to summarize, just like the bottleneck we just talked about, World War I stuff. Yeah, World War I was, a lot of stuff happened back then. Basically, the area that Morocco is in right now was split up between protectorate statuses of the French and Spanish. This area, although it fell within Spanish protectorate domain, was at the crossroads of many European influences. Everyone wanted a part of it. France, Spain, UK, Italy, Portugal, Belgium, USA, and Sweden and Netherlands all agreed to jointly administer the interzone, and it became a free port. And from then on, it kind of had a reputation of being like a Wild West / Vegas type of place in the early 20th century, which then made it a very attractive destination to people like artists and fashion designers, but as well as like spies and smugglers and overall shady delinquent people, and it became a hot spot for like anything and everything. And of course, smugglers liked it because the free port status, which meant that nothing could be considered contraband, and artists liked it because the drugs that were brought in from the Rift Mountains, so yeah. Celebrities would throw huge parties there with celebrity guests like Ian Fleming, Orson Welles, T.S. Eliot. Nobody needed a work permit and there was no real sense of identity, so nobody was a foreigner. So essentially, what was their downfall? Well, the local Moroccan people. And after their king was kind of exiled to Madagascar, they were kind of like, rioting and pissed off at the debaucherous defilement that Westerners brought into their Islamic nation. Yeah, it's kind of what happens. And eventually, over time, after Morocco was given independence, it was absorbed back into Morocco. The next one, and this is an even weirder and crazier one, here's a title, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace. It existed for 13 years in what is now China. And at its height, it had 30 million people, with the capital at Tianjin, today present Nanjing. This was basically the cult-like state that led up to the Taiping Rebellion against the Qing dynasty. So yeah. So long story short, there's this guy named Hong Xiu Quan, an ethnic Hakka, which is a subgroup of the Han. Han, who tried to become a civil servant of the government, and he failed his test 3 times. At some point, he has a mental breakdown, and after being exposed to some pamphlets, he gets visions and dreams and develops his own cult. It fused its own interpretations of Protestant Christianity and traditional Chinese folk religion elements based off of the faith of Shangti, and he creates his God-worshipping society. Basically, he claimed to be the Chinese younger brother of Jesus, and then he was sent to get rid of the world of evil, or in his view, the Qing dynasty, who was oppressing the Han majority. And keep in mind, this was right after the First Opium War, and China was pretty edgy. He described himself as king, and after a few skirmishes with the Qing authorities, they even got the support from other regional rebel groups like the Black Flag Army, the Red Turbans, and the Islamic rebels. They eventually went full-blown war in 1851. Eventually, the Qing dynasty would later get help from the French and the British, and they were able to squelch the movement, and today it's described as the world's most gigantic man-made disasters of the 19th century. Somewhere around 20 to 30 million deaths. So yeah, that was a big notable moment in history. It all starts because this guy claims to be the Chinese younger brother of Jesus. Like, before we move on to the final countries, I just want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a resource for people that want to customize specific issues that they want to tackle with legitimate licensed therapists. And you know, here's the thing. In real life, this is actually pretty hard to do because not all therapists are the same, and you never know exactly what's right for you until you meet them in person, and then you have to deal with like booking and stuff. It's a lot. But BetterHelp makes this entire process much easier and convenient. They provide affordable and accessible therapy for people that have difficulty finding it, especially if local options are limited or not available. You just sign up, fill out some questions, and get matched with a professional therapist. They even have different language options if you prefer, like Spanish or Mandarin. And here's the thing, if you don't think that they fit you, you can switch to another one for no extra cost without stressing about things like insurance or who's in your network and so on. It makes it a lot easier. I know, Match, it kind of sounds like a dating app for finding a therapist, but it's more like customizing your needs to be met. Match. And if you think you might be considering therapy, and if this is something for you, go to this link right here. There's also a link in the bio of this video, and you can click on it and get started, and it offers a 10% discount for your first month with a licensed professional. Thank you, BetterHelp, for supporting Geography Now. And with that, let's get back into the weird countries that existed. Here's the next one, Principality of Trinidad. Not Trinidad and Tobago, and it's not even the island of Trinidad. It's actually another island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which today is a Brazilian naval base in the state of Espírito Santo. But yeah, anyway, it existed for 2 years, and here's the story. Basically, it was the island of a spoiled brat. Basically, Hickey was born in San Francisco, but he was brought to France at a young age, and as a child, he was enamored by the French royalty. He published a newspaper that was very pro-royalty, the Triboulet. He also published a bunch of books that were like pro-royalty and had a lot of royalist values, these books right here. Soon after, anti-French Republic sentiments in his papers, they all got him in trouble, as in people were challenging him to duels, he had fines and lawsuits, it was a mess. Later, he divorced his first wife and then went on a spiritual quest to India and Tibet. On his way to Tibet, he noticed the tiny island of Trinidad in the South Atlantic. Now, the Portuguese passed by and they named it that, but they didn't really care about it and nobody claimed it. So legally, it was a res nullis. So he started scheming up and claimed it for himself and proclaimed himself the military dictator prince. He started getting attention. Most of it was negative and derogatory, but he still loved it. He attempted to sell government bonds for $200, granting free access to the new kingdom. Lots of his funding came from his new industrialist father-in-law that he constantly complained about. He even opened up an embassy in New York where he lived. He didn't even live on the island. He lived in New York. And he tried really hard to make this a thing. Fun fact, the embassy today is now a fashion store supposedly, but if you look at it at Google Maps, there's a stupid van blocking the entrance view. I don't know, that's what it says. What was the downfall? Well, in 1895, telecommunications were becoming a thing. And the British started to lay down transatlantic cables and decided to use this island as a stopping off point before reaching Brazil. And as you know, the British Empire was way bigger and stronger than one man who said he owned something. So they just kind of stepped in and claimed it. Like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do, John Henry what's his name again? What are you gonna do, Mr. Hickey? Hickey. I can't believe that's his name. So clearly Hickey was furious. He wrote angry letters to the British and even asked his father-in-law if he could help fund a revenge plan to invade England via Ireland. But at this point, his father-in-law was like, boy, shut your up, his father-in-law was done with him. So by 1898, he was widely mocked in the media, and he ended up taking his own life in a hotel in El Paso, Texas. And that was the end of that. So his life ended as a cautionary tale. And finally, the last one, the People's Republic of Tuva. It existed for 23 years. Kind of. Basically, this is the area of what is now the Tuva Autonomous Republic in Russia. Now, this place, which is claimed to be the geographic center of Asia, used to be part of Mongolia, and then the Manchu Qing dynasty. Then the Xinhai Revolution happened in 1911, as well as revolutions in Mongolia. While all of that was happening, the Russians put them under protectorate status under the Russian Empire as Uryankhai Krai. But here's the thing. The Russian Empire fell in 1917, just 3 years later. So in 1921, nobody was claiming them, which kind of made it a perfect time for them to claim independence. But the USSR was like still heavily monitoring them, and they were essentially just a puppet state only recognized by Russia and Mongolia. For what it's worth though, they had their own currency, the Tuvan Aksa. They had their own postage stamps, which had the Mongolic writing system. A former Buddhist Lama monk named Donduk Kular became the prime minister and insisted that Buddhism become the state religion. However, when the Soviets saw the whole theocratic leaning thing, they kind of saw it as like an opposition to Soviet principles. So it eventually led to a coup d'etat backed by the USSR in 1929. From there, Kular was deposed, as was half of the parliament, as well as aristocrats, political dissidents, Buddhist monks. Buddhist monasteries and symbols were also destroyed, and in place collectivism programs were implemented, which is why the writing system also changed from Mongolic to Cyrillic. During World War II though, the Soviets did kind of make sure that Tuva was untouched when the Japanese Empire was taking over parts of Manchuria in China, and eventually the whole thing just kind of led to the absorption into the USSR in 1944. But for a short period of time, they were kind of their own country. Tuva. Not Tuvalu, Tuva. And I will admit, they do kind of have a cool flag. So there you go, 5 weird countries you've never heard of that existed. It's crazy how, you know, like this world is crazy enough as it is, but when you go back in history, you realize the crazy never left. It's always been there. It just took different shapes and forms. In any case, I hope you guys had fun. Cheers and stay cool, stay tuned.